All right. Hello, welcome everyone. As you're joining, you'll notice that you are joining in listen-only mode for this webinar style event this afternoon. It is technically afternoon because it is just now noon. My name is Isabel Crum. I'm a startup business consultant here at the Temple Small Business Development Center. Very happy to welcome you all to today's webinar, Legal Considerations on Brand Building. If this is your first session with the Temple SBDC, welcome. We are one of a large network of accredited small business development centers across the country. We offer low or no cost business counseling and business training to help your business meet its goals. And so today we are going to be focusing on legal considerations and brand building. I'll introduce our speaker in just a moment, but as we go along, a couple housekeeping notes. Your questions are very welcome, but because of the format of today, you're not able to come off mute and ask them out loud. There's a Q&A function that we'll be using, so please do feel free to drop any questions you like into the question and answer field. We will take them periodically throughout the presentation. So but I will be monitoring those. I promise we will see your questions. We will get to them, put them in the Q&A. And you can also reach me in the chat if you have any administrative questions, any technical difficulties, anything like that. You can find me in the chat. So with that, I'd love to introduce the CEO and managing partner of Snyder Lodge, Janelle Payton, who is going to take us through today's topic on brand building. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today. I will let you know that this is my favorite topic to talk about. To me, it's the most colorful, it's the most creative. So I am looking forward to today's talk as well. So my name is Janelle Payton. We just went through a rebrand of the firm. So funny, we're talking about intellectual property. We used to be called Snyder Law, but we changed it to Payton Law. I finally committed to my husband now. So that's an ongoing joke in our family because we've been married for quite some time, but I'd never changed my name until this year. So the firm is now Payton Law, but you'll see some things come up regarding Snyder Law, same thing. So I do apologize. We're kind of in the middle of that rebrand right now. If you have any questions about rebranding, I'm happy to share my story as if some of you are looking at doing that as well. The one thing I just wanted to let you guys know is the firm has been around now we're going on 7 years. I've been in the business much longer than that, but kind of the interesting piece about me is that I was a business owner first. So I worked in the construction industry. I owned a millwork installation company. And if you know what that is, we installed all of the woodwork in commercial properties. So think about the windows and doors and all the trim work and the cabinetry and things like that. And I really fell in love with the small business world. And so when that company came time to move on from it, I went into the law, and ever since I've been working with small and medium-sized business owners, so privately held companies. So the firm is very focused on helping specifically business owners, and specifically with their transactional, their entity formation work, their contracts, and their intellectual property as well. So on that, let's dig in. Let me see here. And there we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different topics today. What's in a name is what I'm calling part 1. The value of intellectual property, which I think is a very important conversation to have, and trade secrets, because that seems to be something that not a lot of business owners really put enough time and attention into. So I want to make sure that you're not missing something there. The idea behind this talk today is even though we're in a pandemic or coming out of it, depending upon how you look at things, we still need to be identifying ideas and growing your business, because that is, if you're not growing, then you're shrinking or you're failing. So we want to keep you and your head in the right place as we come out of this. So let's start. What's in a name? All right, so I like to ask questions of you guys because I would like you to test your knowledge. So the first question I have for you is, business owners can name their company any name they can imagine. True or false? What do you think? And I'll give you a few seconds to think that over. So the answer here is false. You really could name your company whatever you want, but you don't want to for a couple of different reasons. So the first reason is when you name your company, and if you guys are already named, I'll move through this quickly. If you're already named, you have to register with the state. So if you're a Pennsylvania company like I am, you register with the state of Pennsylvania. If maybe you're looking for investors or to start something a little bit bigger, a franchise, something like that, then you might be registering in Delaware. Either way, or wherever your company is, wherever it is, you have to check with the Bureau of Corporations or whatever it's called in that state to make sure that that name is available. Now, is that part of intellectual property? Is that something trademarked? What are you doing here? I'll tell you, the only thing you're doing is making sure that your name is ever so slightly different than the next person's name so that the state knows who they're taxing. That's what it is. So we could have Peyton Law LLC, and then we could have Peyton, Call LLC. Basically sound the same. You might get them confused in a normal day. It doesn't matter. You could have Peyton Law with an EY, which is what I am. You could have Peyton Law with an AY. Doesn't matter. As long as one character is different, the state knows which one they're taxing what. So that's all they care about. When we talk about trademark registration, then that's a little bit different. So when do you need to trademark with the state? You want to trademark with the state if you've got a great name for your company or for your product, but you are very, very local. So you will only ever do business in the state. How common is this today? Think like your local pizza shop, local retailers like Main Street USA kind of businesses. Most companies and most businesses now do commerce outside of their own state. So if you have a website and you ship something to New Jersey or California or Mississippi, any other state, you're now doing business in another state. So you now have outgrown state trademark registration. In the past, this was a big deal. Now we don't do many at all because honestly, most businesses are online or have an online piece or an online component. And being in Pennsylvania, and I know a lot of you guys are probably in the Philly area, New Jersey's, not even an hour away, not even half an hour away. Delaware, same thing. So we live in an area of the country where we are doing interstate business, interstate commerce pretty often. So it's hard to find a company that's not. So then we look at federal registration of your trademark, service mark, logo, trade name, kind of what we're talking about here. And when do we do this? So you are in interstate commerce, it's called. So the day that you hire someone across the state line, or you ship a product across the state line, anything across the state line, you are now officially in interstate commerce. So that's one threshold to cross to know whether or not you can register federally. The other one is you want to think about your name versus the goods and service that you're selling. So when we register with it's the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and long fancy name, I know, USPTO is what we call it. We want to register with them. And what this gives you is it gives you protection of your name. If you can get your name registered, then no one else can use your name for any goods or service that might even be construed as close to yours. So think about the name, and names have different levels. For example, it could be a very common name. Like my name of my company is my last name. Not very creative. A lot of people have this last name. Is it protectable? Nah. But then if I called it a group of names or a name with another noun, or I put two nouns together and made a compound word that didn't exist before, okay, that's a little bit more creative. That's a little bit different. So that is a little bit easier to register than maybe just a common word or a common name. Next level beyond that is a made up word. So, or a word that's not completely, but not really used in our language, or it's a foreign language word, something like that. It's very different, very creative. If no one else is using this word, then that's the best. That's the best protection you can get. And it's very clear if anybody else uses it. So you're thinking about the name itself and how creative or different that is versus the goods and services that you're using it for. So you need both of these things. You need to think through both of these things, because when we submit to the USPTO for registration, They have examiners there that are going to look at these two things together. So what do I mean by goods and services? Well, what are you selling? If it's a product, what kind of product? If it's a service, how do you define the service? So marketing and peanut butter are going to be two different goods and services in two different classes as far as the USPTO is concerned. So if you have, Jiffy peanut butter, Jif, I guess it is, Jif peanut butter, and you have Jif marketing, you could probably get registration for both of those because they're two totally different goods and services. And what they're looking for there is that the consumer, the average consumer, is not going to become confused and buy the wrong product. So what they're really trying to protect against is, think Coach bags, Gucci bags, go that route. They don't want you buying a knockoff thinking that it's the real thing. So are you going to go to the grocery store looking for Jif peanut butter and accidentally buy Jif marketing services? No, it's not going to happen. So those two can coexist. The other side of that is the name. The fun thing I like to mention or bring up is you've got Jif peanut butter, you've got Jiffy Pop popcorn, and Jiffy Lube oil changes, right? The oil change place. So are you going to, go to Jiffy Lube, drive into Jiffy Lube with your car and think that you're buying peanut butter? No, it's not going to happen. So those can coexist. So these are the things we want to think about when you're naming your company, because the more creative and the more exclusive your name is, the better protectable it is. And then as you grow your brand, it will be identifiable to your consumers and then protectable. And then there's value in growing your brand, which is what we'll talk about next. But let's see if there's any questions about this section, and then we'll go on to the next.
All right, so I do have a couple of questions here in the Q&A. The first is, do you have to register your business with the state if you're selling on Etsy?
That's a good question. You never have to register your business with the state. You can do a DBA. And what a DBA is it is you as a person doing business under whatever your business name is. So you can register with the state as a DBA, or you can go ahead and form an entity. The difference there is that if you are a DBA and you are just doing business yourself, and it happens, and sometimes that's often how businesses start. Maybe it's a hobby and then it becomes a business. But what happens is you are not protected from your business and your business is not protected from you. So what happens there is that should something go wrong, which, obviously we hope it doesn't, in your business, you are your business. So that means that if something goes wrong, somebody, gets hurt from one of your products you're selling on Etsy, they can come after you personally. They can lean against your house. They can, lean against your car, take your bank accounts, that sort of thing. Pretty scary. Doesn't happen all the time, but it is scary when it does happen. So what we try to do, and what I recommend all of my clients do, is form an entity. So even if it's like a Pennsylvania LLC, relatively simple to form, relatively easy to set up and keep going. But what it does is you get a separate, what's called a federal identification number, or federal employer identification number, FEIN, or people call it an EIN. The business at that point is its own entity, and you are your own person and you are separate. So now if anything happens to your business, they can't come in after anything that you own personally, but vice versa as well. So let's say you're, driving somewhere and you hit someone. You could be involved in a lawsuit about that, but your business would not be affected. So the good thing is if you have a business, and you separate it from yourself, God forbid something happens in one world or the other, it'll never be both. The other can continue on. So if something happens in your business, personally, you can continue on. If something happens personally, at least your business is still going on and can support you. So that was maybe a lot of information, but
That was great. There's one follow-up question, which is, so they wouldn't sue Etsy, they would sue the business owner.
Right. So that's, and I don't know Etsy's policies off the top of my head, but I don't think that Etsy is protecting you as much as you may think. That being said, though, it does seem that when I've seen disputes over Etsy they try to help take care of it with you, for you, whatever. So there's always risk there. And it really is how much risk are you willing to take on as you do business? So, I mean, if you're selling like Bejeweled chainsaws on Etsy, high risk. Yes, definitely get under a company. But if you're selling, I don't know, pillows, no, you probably not no, but you might not need it as much as if you were selling chainsaws. I don't know where I came up with that example, but hopefully that clarifies.
It's a funny example. So what if your company intends to do business in many different categories?
So what I recommend doing there is we will pick your number one category. Actually, we can file for every category, but if we have some time and some budget constraints, then I recommend we pick the category that makes you the most money. Start there, we file that one, and then we move on from there. So what I help my clients do is we'll sit down and we'll look at the whole big picture, and we'll try to pull out all the pieces of intellectual property. And I'll get into this a little bit later with you guys. I have a worksheet for you and stuff. But we will look at everything, and then we will prioritize what's most important. So ultimately, you want your entire brand and all of your intellectual property protected, but that might take, years and a lot of money to get to that point. So what we'll do together is we'll identify the one thing that's going to help you the most, or the one thing that is most valuable, and we'll protect that first. And then we can kind of move on from there and decide what's second, what's third, and get you all up to date in the timeline that works for you.
Got it. So a couple questions here around the difference between LLC and registering a name and DBA. So if you have an LLC, do you need to get the name registered? And then secondarily, kind of a similar thing, can you start as a DBA and then upgrade later?
So absolutely, you can start as a DBA and upgrade later. As I said, a lot of people will do something to start, or they'll do it as a hobby, or they'll just test it first. And essentially they'll be working as a DBA. And then when they realize, yes, this is legitimate, this is a business, I have income coming in, I want a separate bank account for it, then they'll go ahead and form the entity. And I forget what the first part of the question was. I'm sorry.
So if you have an LLC, do you need to have a name registration separately?
You do not. If you are doing business under your name, and that is your main brand name as well, then you actually don't need to register anything with anyone. You don't need to. You might want to, because you want to protect it. But if you have a business name, but you're doing business under a different name, like that's the name you're putting out there to sell yourself, then you do need to have a DBA, or fictitious name registration, is what it's called in Pennsylvania. But the thing to know is that if you have a name that you would like to protect, protecting it gives you a lot. It gives you a lot of power to make sure that other people are not using it. And it gives you, it basically says, I own this name. Everyone in the country now has notice, because they could look you up and find you on the USPTO website then. So everyone in the country has noticed that you are using this name, you are doing business under this name, or this trademark, or this logo, whatever it is we filed. And if anyone infringes on you, anyone takes your name or tries to copy your name or copies your website, whatever it might be, it's yours. So they have to prove, not you, you sit back and relax. They have to prove that they're not infringing for some reason. And what happens there is that if they can't prove that they're not infringing, then you can get a lot of damages. And that's the cool thing about our country. I'll go off on a tangent here for a second, but our country, more so than any other country in the world, our laws protect our ideas more than anybody else's. So if someone takes an idea of yours that you are protecting, whether it be a name, or we'll talk about trade secrets in a little bit, but if somebody takes that and uses it to their advantage, you can get back not only all the money that they've made off of your name, but up to 10 times damages on that. And that's not true in any other area of law. And that's not true in any other country. So we live in a place that really is protecting our ideas and wants us to foster and grow these ideas. And I think that's part of what makes this country so cool. So.
On that note about protecting a name, could an old, now defunct brand that was shelved after a merger pose a problem to someone attempting to register a similar but different name? The example in the question is like Smithtown Asset Management versus Smithtown Wealth Management.
So I cannot give you a direct answer on that. I would have to know a little bit more. The answer is going to have to be maybe for now, but a lot of it depends on how long has it been defunct. And if they completely let it go, then you can use it. I've helped clients take brands, but brands that were retired, trademarks that were retired. They do, if you don't keep them up, they do expire. Take an expired trademark and take it over and use it. So it happens. It not regularly, but it does happen, especially with names that are somewhat known. I wouldn't say very known, and I wouldn't say unknown at all, but usually names that are kind of somewhat known in an area.
Some more LLC questions, which I know is maybe not totally the topic, but it seems to be on a lot of folks' minds. So what is the main difference between an FEIN and state registry?
So an FEIN is a registration actually with the Internal Revenue Service. So it's the same thing as a social security number for a person. It is your social security number for the country, for the business. And the state registration, it's with the state, but it's the state level taxation, excuse me, that they're trying to keep track of with the state level name registration.
And then as an insurance agent, do you have to register or have an LLC?
As an insurance agent, you don't, but I do have a lot of them as clients, so they do tend to register. Any independent contractor is more protected if they register an entity. So I do a lot of registrations for the insurance industry, and also I'm missing the word, real estate, people in real estate, because they're also considered independent contractors.
Can more than one business operate under the same LLC? Like an Etsy craft shop, consulting business with the same LLC?
That you want to think about risk. You can do it, absolutely. But if one piece of that is riskier than the others, you might want to carve it out into a separate entity. And one thing that will help you make that decision is insurance, general business liability insurance. If your insurance broker is saying that it will be cheaper if you break it into two or even three businesses, or they might not even be able to get you coverage for one if it's attached to the other, that usually ends up being a good indicator of whether or not you might want to do that. But I also help a lot with people who are owning properties, investment properties. So, and there's some play to be had there, because if you hold every single investment property in its separate entity, it's great from a legal standpoint. It's great for, keeping each in its own entity and making sure that, if something goes wrong at one, it's not affecting another one. However, from an accounting standpoint, that can get very complicated. So I do work with real estate clients to figure out, okay, well, maybe these 5 smaller properties we can hold in one entity, they're all in the same town or in the same general area, but then this other, maybe apartment complex in a different town should be in its own separate entity in that sense. So it's a balancing act, and what goes into it is it's a lot about risk, but it's also about reality and accounting and just making sure that we're not overcomplicating things for whatever level your business is at.
I have a few more questions, so if we need to move on, just let me know. But
I would say we move on to the other parts, and I absolutely I do consultations. So if we don't get to all of the questions, They're free, they're 20 minutes. It's like we can sit down and we can answer things specifically. But I don't want everyone to miss out on the rest of it.
Actually, I do have one question that's relevant to the name thing, and it's a couple people asked it. What if somebody else has your name, but you registered it first?
If you registered it first, it should be yours. There are some things we look at before we absolutely let them know that, but what we usually do there is send them a letter, which can range from very nice to not very nice. And we let them know that they're infringing on your name and on your brand. And the thing to keep in mind there is that we can get creative. So sometimes people don't realize it and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I will stop using it immediately. Some people are doing it on purpose, and then we usually have to get a little bit more, specific with them. But I've also had situations where a Pennsylvania company, or I'll say it's an East Coast company, because they were larger than just Pennsylvania, found out that a company out in California was using their name. And when we contacted them, they wanted to continue using the name. So we said, look, we haven't expanded out to the West Coast yet. So how about we give you permission to use it for now? We can revoke permission at any time, and you're going to pay us a licensing fee, a royalty fee. So the client, the Pennsylvania client, was thrilled because they were looking at this like, great, we're going to have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lawsuit to get them to stop. But no, we changed it into a money-making proposition for them. So it's not necessarily always a bad thing if somebody starts using your name.
All right, win-win. There are more questions. We'll pick up with them after the next break.
Okay, so the next section we said we were going to talk about is the value of intellectual property. And I can tell you guys are serious about your intellectual property because of all the questions we're getting, which is great. But this little quiz, here it is. Intellectual property, and think trade names, logos, trade secrets, patents, are more valuable than real property. Equipment, real estate, think about that. Think about like in a factory setting. True or false? What do you guys think about this one? And I have to admit that this was a trick question, so everyone is right. But the point I want to make here is that it could be more valuable than real property. So what I like to talk to people about is picture in your mind like a small manufacturing facility, let's say, and that's what this little house represents on this chart. But it might be the property itself, it might be machines and equipment, it might be initial raw materials to get the business going. That's all tangible things. And it makes sense. A business brings in a tangible thing and it sends out a tangible thing. But think about the intangibles a little bit. And I picked, I've got two boys that are playing basketball now. So Air Jordans come up a lot in my household. So we got the Air Jordan logo going on here. And what I want you to think about is like, let's say this small manufacturing facility and equipment, $500,000 to get it started, right? $500,000, and then over the years you have maintenance and upkeep, you're paying insurances, so you're investing in this piece of property, right? So keep that in mind. Switch to the intellectual property. So it cost, I believe I read this, but I believe it cost Nike about $35 to get this logo made. And let's say, and I don't know, but let's say they paid their attorney $2,000 to register it for them. So initial investment, not much, right? Generally, it's for most intellectual property. Patents are a little bit more expensive, but any other type of intellectual property, it's pretty easy to protect, generally speaking. Easy in terms of financially, it's not too expensive to protect. And then all of the advertising you're doing, all of the marketing, all of the branding you're doing is going into building that intellectual property, building that brand. So it's very similar to the real estate where you're paying for insurance, you're paying for the maintenance and the upkeep of that tangible property. Same thing. You're paying your trademark fees and paying your attorney to keep things up to date so that you're keeping hold and you're keeping that piece of intellectual property. You're keeping it safe and protected. So let's fast forward 10, 20 years. You're ready to get out of the business. The property itself is worth $1 million. That's great. That's 2 times increase on what you paid for that property or that equipment, whatever it might be. That's a great deal. You did great. You know, nothing to complain about there. Fast forward with intellectual property. The last thing I read about it's not even Nike as a company, but the Air Jordan piece of the company is that it brings in revenue-wise $3 billion a year. So obviously I'm a little bit biased here. I'm showing you something that's worth a lot, but the point is they paid $35 for this image. $35, and they turned it into $3 billion. So think about intellectual property, not as just, I should protect this, but what is the value in protecting this? What could this be worth? And think about it in terms of your exit plan. You know, someday you are going to pass this business on. Is it going to be to a child? Is it going to be that you're selling it and this is your retirement? So think about what value this brings to whoever is buying it or taking it on next. And I can tell you that intellectual property is taxed at a different rate when you sell your business. So this piece of real estate is going to be taxed very high, but this piece of intellectual property gets a lot of tax breaks. So there's a lot of value to taking your intellectual property seriously. And I threw on here a tip because I usually get this question and I wanted to make sure I clarified. Using the R, the registration with the little circle, and the TM that you see on the side of logos a lot of times are at names. And I even have it at the bottom of my screen. You can see Strategic Legal Solutions, which is my intellectual property. I have the little TM symbol right behind it. So what does that mean? You know, and then below it, I have copyright 2021 patent law. What does that mean? So let me tell you quick. So if you are thinking about trademarking something, but you haven't done so yet, that's when you use the little TM. That's, hey, I'm trying this out. I think I like this. I'm going to trademark it. I intend to keep rights in this as a phrase, as a word for whatever my goods and services are. So I put the little TM that kind of reserves it to the world. When I go through the process with the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, that at the end of that process, if my trademark is registered and I have ownership of it, they will send a certificate, little fancy gold seal and everything. And at that point, you have a registered trademark. That is when you use the R with the little circle. And that's when you have all of your rights protected and pretty much no one's going to want to mess with you. And then the copyright at the bottom, what's going on there is you copyright is a little bit different than trademark in that copyright protects if it's words, it protects the order of the words. And if it's images, it protects kind of your depiction of that image. So copyrights, you think about books, you think about photos, you think about artwork, you think about websites, think about marketing materials, things like that. A copyright does not copyright, like no one else can use the word intellectual because I used it on the screen and I copyrighted it. No, but you can't take my question and use it in your program because I copyrighted it and I said, I wrote this for myself for my program. So that's what the copyright means. So that's why you see it on websites and that's why you see it on photos and things like that. Now, the interesting thing about copywriting photos, because I do work with a lot of artists or photos and artwork, is that if I take a picture of a tree and I copyright that, and you take a picture of the same tree, and then someone else comes by and paints a picture of that tree, I guarantee you all 3 of those will be different and all 3 will be copyrightable. So what that means is that once you copyright it, somebody can't take, it's not that they can't take another picture of that tree or paint another picture of that tree, it's that they can't take your picture, the one that you took when the sun was setting just this way and the bird flew over just that way, or the one that you painted and you used, you know, dark green and somebody else is going to use light green, you know, so what you're protecting is your expression of that form of art. So people can't take your exact your print, your copy, your artwork, but they can go and make another picture about that tree. So that's a question I get a lot as well. So I'll take a break here, see what kind of questions we have on this, and then we will move forward.
Right. So we still have a few questions on LLCs that are carried over from the first section. Does an LLC have to be renewed periodically?
That depends on the state. The state of Pennsylvania, you do not need to renew it. And that's one of the great things about LLCs is that they do protect you as a separate entity, but they're very easy to maintain and they don't require annual meetings and they don't require bylaws and they don't require minutes like corporations do. So it really is usually in almost every situation, it's worth it to go ahead and register as an LLC.
Got it. Could you have an LLC or a C Corp while working a full-time job?
You can, but I would check and make sure that your employee handbook or your, if you have an agreement with your company, that it doesn't say that you are not allowed to do outside activities like that.
There's a question here from Jean. Jean, I'm not sure I understand your question. So if you want to type it in the chat or just send me any clarifications, I'd appreciate it. But I have a question from Anonymous here. If a nonprofit has a similar name, should I avoid using that name?
Again, it depends on what you want to use it for. So if, you know, they are a nonprofit, I don't know, planting trees, and you are looking to use it to, you know, offer car service to people, two totally different things. So it might be okay. Sometimes it's not, but we would look at that together with you to try to figure that out. So for example, if you want, like, I'll go with the Nike Air Jordan thing. If you want to use Nike for anything else, it's going to be tough because that brand is so recognized and so well known. Not impossible, but probably you want to shy away from using Nike. But there's other brands out there that, you know, are not don't nearly have the recognition that Nike does, that you could use the same name, but use it for something very different.
Awesome. Are recipes trademark secrets? I think Kim might have meant trade secrets or trademarkable. Are recipes?
So they are not trademarkable, but they are definitely trade secrets. And the story I have there, and this is actually a good lead into our next section. The example that I have there is, from what I understand, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Most people have heard of that, right? So supposedly they make their spice blend in one factory, and they actually put the blend into the crunchy stuff and make the chicken in a separate factory. And apparently if you work in one factory, you are precluded and you cannot work in the other factory, so that no one can actually know the entire recipe. So that is a trade secret for sure. And you see a lot of people sharing recipes in books, you know, like that became very popular in the last 10 years or so. They copyright the book itself, so no one else could use that recipe in another book unless, you know, they get permission to. But most people, when they are actually making the product and selling it, it is a trade secret, and you want to keep it a trade secret.
Another intellectual property question: would you advise trademarking a brand name and/or logo, or copywriting it?
A brand name and logo, you trademark. Any kind of marketing material that would go along with that, you would copyright. So the things that you trademark are the name, the logo. If you have some kind of special packaging, so think Tiffany's and the little blue box, that color blue is protected by them. Sounds can be protected. If you think of jingles for certain brands, they might have, you know, a little sound that goes along with them that makes you think of that brand. That is trademarkable. And then the layout of stores. So if you think of an Apple store, it's laid out in a certain way, has a certain feel to it. Every Apple store has that same feel, if it's not exactly laid out the same, but no other store is laid out that way. That's because they protected the design of the store. So those are the different things that you trademark. Hopefully that clarifies for you.
Great. The attendee said, thank you for that answer. I don't see any other questions at this point. Oh,
All right.
One just came in. What is a safe way to share your idea as you look for help when you don't yet have a patent or a copyright?
That is a great question, and I don't have it in this program, so I'm glad that you asked it. It's called a non-disclosure agreement, or an NDA. And what you do with this is it's usually a pretty straightforward document. And when I write them for people, I usually make it mutual unless it doesn't lend itself to that situation. But what it does is it says, look, I'm about to share confidential information with you. I need you to keep it secret. So this is you signing off that you agree to keep it secret. So that's what we do. And I actually was on the phone with a client just before this, and he's meeting with a potential investor because he's looking to potentially franchise his company. And what we were talking about was an NDA. He doesn't have one yet. So we need to put one together for him because he's meeting the investor on Friday. And he wants to make sure that when he shares his business plan and his numbers, that he can do so and that it will still be protected.
What if investors are not willing to sign the NDA?
Well, that does happen. Sorry, that does happen. And at that situation, it's up to you how you want to proceed. They will not, certain investors that are in the business of investing will oftentimes say that they don't want to, or they will have their own. That's because they're meeting with so many people that they don't remember one from another, and they don't remember what they're supposed to keep secret and not keep secret. So with that in mind, it might be worth the risk. But usually when it's an investor that is not, investing in a lot of different things, they are usually fine with it because they know that they're serious about investing with you. You probably didn't make it this far unless they were very serious and they already had some interest in what you were doing and who you are. So usually at that point, they are okay signing it.
Okay, great. And then we have a hand up from one of our attendees. If you could drop your question or comment in the chat, that would be great. Don't see any other questions at this point. So Janelle, I will.
All right, so the last section we were going to talk about here is trade secrets, and I'll be conscious of time. Question here, every business has trade secrets, true or false? And this is not a trick question, I promise. So the answer to this one is true. I have not met a business that does not have a trade secret. And maybe there's one out there, so you guys can prove me wrong. But if you think about recipes are great, client lists. I ask companies, do you have a client list? If somebody walked away tomorrow with your client list, would that harm your company? Would that be bad for you? Would you be upset about that? The answer is always yes. And that is intellectual property. That is something that you have put together, that you've worked through over time to put together, that your business relies on, that if it walked away tomorrow, you would be hurting, right? So a client list is intellectual property. And that's usually something that we keep a trade secret. So the difference between trade secrets and the other types of intellectual property that we've talked about, and the other types are the patents, the trademarks, the copyrights, things like that. Those are protectable by registering them with an entity. So the US Patent and Trademark Office or the Copyright Office. You have rights to those at some degree, even before you copyright them or before you get them registered with an office. But you have your most rights when you register them with an office. Trade secrets are what they sound like. They are secrets. There's no place to register them. You don't share them with anyone. You don't send them to a government agency to get registered. They are true secrets. So you have to be able to show that you are keeping it a secret. And the story I want to give to you guys here, which I think is great, is a current client of mine. We were talking about 2 months ago now about how her business was growing, and she had started pricing things in a particular way. She's a service-oriented business, and the way that she was pricing her services was different than anybody else in her industry. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about that. So she told me how she has this Excel spreadsheet and she's got all these calculations and whatever. And so we started getting a little bit more serious talking about it. And I said, who has access to this? You know, is it an app style where somebody plugs in numbers and it spits it out and they don't see the back end equations, or can they see the back end equations? And that's when we found out it's in Excel. And so we talked through this and we said, you know what, this is a proprietary pricing model. This is something that makes you different from all of your competitors. And this is something that your clients really enjoy about their experience working with you. So I said, how about this? We are going to password protect that Excel spreadsheet. Only the people who need to have it are going to have access to it. And that's her and one other person that does pricing with her. And go ahead and tell your clients about this. And she has a little slide deck that she shares with onboarding clients or prospects. And, you know, it's a couple of slides. And now one slide talks about her proprietary pricing model. And she calls it that. And she says, this is one of our trade secrets. This is what we do. This is the result. This is how it benefits you. And her closing rate on her sales, the last time I talked to her, she said it tripled. So if she was closing, 1 in 6, she's now closing 3, 4, and 6. And just pulling that out. And there's not much I can do for her except for advise her how to keep it a secret. Tripled her sales. So sometimes these trade secrets, maybe it's not something that, is obvious or huge or, life-changing, but it's a pricing model she designed and came up with. Didn't really think much of it except that this seemed to make sense for how she was pricing things. But look, now it's a tool to sell her services to other people and differentiate herself. And it makes her look like she's much more advanced in the industry than a lot of other people are. So that's kind of the reason we come together and talk about this, because you probably have intellectual property that you don't even realize you have. And if we can get together and we can figure out what that is, then we can define it and we can protect it if it's worth protecting. There might be a brand name that you've used in the past that doesn't make you much money. Maybe that's not worth protecting, but you might have a brand name now that's, the bulk of your sales. And with the pandemic, a lot of people have shifted how they're doing business, or they've shifted products and services. And it might be a slight shift, but it might be very important to how you do business. This wasn't a huge shift in what she was doing. It was small, but it made a huge impact when we called it out, carved it out, and said, this is intellectual property. We're protecting it. And look, now we're going to tell people it's intellectual property. She's not giving away the secret itself, but she's telling people she has a secret. So same thing with client lists. Those are very important to protect. And how do you protect them? You don't register them with the state or with the government or anything like that. You make sure that your employee agreements and your independent contractor agreements and your employee manual and those documents that run your company all talk about how the client list is the property of the company, and no one is allowed to take it. No one's allowed to download it. No one's allowed to walk off with it. If they leave, you should have non-competition, non-compete clauses in place, things like that. So really, I want to make sure that your business is growing as much as it can. So I'm going to jump to my last little section here, which is about finding your intellectual property. And that's really what we're here to do and to help you do. So last question, I promise. Business owners should be strategic about developing and protecting their intellectual property. All right, so I'm kind of leading you here. Yes, the answer is true. And what I want to share with you is that you'll get these slides and they'll tell you a little bit more about this, but I also have a little workbook page for you, and it's just a page and it's pretty simple, and I can't really read it probably on my screen, but it's a little chart to go through and kind of ask yourself, like, hey, do I have some trade secrets? If so, write them down. Do I have some trademarks? If so, write them down. Are they registered? If they're registered, great. Write down the registration number, and then you've got it in a place for when you need it. Or if you're talking to your attorney, or if you're talking to me, you can say, yes, I have this, this, and this registered. I have this that's not registered. Should I talk to you about that? So I've got a section for trade secrets, a section for trademarks, logos, things like that. A section for patents, and then a section called agreements and licenses. And we haven't talked much about this part. This is where the NDA would come in. That's considered an agreement. That's your employment agreements that might talk about the client list and how that is protected property. But it could also be licenses too, because you probably license software to help your business grow. Or you might let somebody else use your name, or you might have a second location somewhere that you're letting somebody else run. Or you might be thinking about franchising, things like that. So that's what that section is all about. And I wanted to make sure I gave you a little bit of explanation on that before we ran out of time. But if we have some more questions, let's go through them.
Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat, or in the Q&A, but drop them in the Q&A if you have them. We're here, and while you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat a link to a survey for today's webinar. The same funders that enable us to provide these programs at low or no cost to you ask us to evaluate how we did. So please, we really value your feedback. We look at it, we read it, let us know if there's anything else, any other topics we can offer. Yeah, please take the survey. As Janelle said, you will receive the PowerPoint and the materials from today's webinar. But if you do have any questions right now, you can feel free to put them out there. So in the Q&A, we just got one. What is the first thing I need to do to turn my hobby into a small business? Oh, that's a big question. I like that.
Yeah, and that's fun. That's really fun. So the first thing that you probably want to do, and I don't know if you're the same person asking all these questions about LLCs, but you probably want to look into forming an entity. So really the first thing you need is an idea of your name. So start thinking about your name, what you think it could be, what makes sense for the business that you're in, and then we can look around and see if it's available for registration.
I'm also, just because that was a great question, I'm going to plug our Starting a Business 101 class, which is happening next week. You can register for it here at the link in the chat. It's a great class, answers that very question. Next one, I started a YouTube channel with my first name, a lifestyle positivity type of channel. I'd like to share my videos on Facebook, but due to privacy, because Facebook has my last name, should I create a business page on Facebook? I haven't decided if the channel will remain in my name, but privacy concerns, I don't want to use the last name, first name, last name combo on Facebook.
Gotcha. So Facebook is actually quite strict about how you use it. And if you are doing any kind of marketing or promotion on Facebook, you should be doing it as a business or group, or they have a couple of different options, I forget, but not as yourself personally. So when you go and register, look at registering for Facebook pages. And I don't know, maybe SBDC has something on this as well. But if you start promoting business or commerce on your individual page anyway, they will pull it down. So you don't want to do that. If you have your own page, that's fine. But start it, and there's different options. There's like a nonprofit option, there's a business option, there's a group or a movement option. So pick whatever is right for you, but I would go with that route. And then name it whatever, if it's just your first name, or if it's something else, go ahead and name it what you want at that point.
Right. Okay, next question. Would buying a web domain first help protect a brand name?
So it doesn't. And it's good to do, though. I definitely recommend making sure the domain name is available for the name that you're thinking of. But a domain name is considered intellectual property once you own it, but it does not reserve the name for your use. And if you think about it, the domain could be, I'll go back to the peanut butter thing I was talking about earlier. The domain could be jiffy.com, you know, and that could be for the peanut butter people, or it could be for the popcorn people, or it could be for the oil change people. So it doesn't necessarily protect you, although marketing wise, absolutely great thing to have it. So make sure it's available.
Awesome. Next question. I have a name. I just don't know what to do. In Pennsylvania, I'm not allowed to do craft fairs in my area unless I'm a small business. I would recommend to this attendee, contact the SBDC, maybe individually. There's maybe some one-on-one support we could provide. That would be my take. And we do unfortunately need to wrap up soon because there is another webinar event starting in like 4 minutes. I would, if there are any other questions, encourage folks to contact us at the SBDC. We're here to help. Yeah, that is unfortunately all the time that we have today, but I'm going to drop a link to the survey in the chat one more time. Let us know how we did. And Janelle, you've got your contact info up on your final slide, and you've got a QR code, which is cool. I'll let you explain how people can use that.
Yeah, so my personal email is there, so feel free to email, call, text, whatever. The consultation, if you scan that, it'll take you to a website that'll explain a little bit more about what our strategic legal solutions is. And just very quickly, that is a program we put together for business owners to help them figure out the entity piece, the intellectual property piece, all of it. It's a quarterly subscription program. So what we do is we have a set fee for the quarter, and we have a strategy session to figure out, you know, what's most important to you to protect right now. Could be a contract, could be doing some intellectual property. We'll figure it out. We'll help you figure it out. And then we'll spend that quarter working on it. So every quarter we include that strategy session in all correspondence with us at no additional charge. So really all you end up paying for is the time that we spend working on whatever it is we're helping you with, the drafting or the reviewing of contracts or whatever it might be in that sense. And a lot of businesses are really seeming to like it. It's new. We launched it just earlier this year, so it seems to be working out pretty well for people. And I invite you to chat with me about it if you think you might be interested. It might be something that works for you. And yeah, I'm here. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out independently.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And everybody, if we didn't get to your question, check out our events page for upcoming events that might answer it, or reach out to us at sbdc@temple.edu. Maybe we can answer your question offline. And of course, Janelle has made that offer as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Fabulous event. Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.